Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a cloud solutions architect specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 3 of a series. We started focusing on groups in Intune. Today, we will focus on what is called the text box as we look at this. Now, as we get started in this session, I'll just tell you up front, right? This is a session that, as I was preparing and as I'm preparing to talk about it, it's one of those that might make people yawn. It could, right? It's a very important topic. That's why I want to dig into it. But it is one of those that has a tendency to maybe not be as engaging as some of the other discussions. So if you find yourself drifting, take a pause, go get a cup of coffee, whatever, and take a look, because if you really want to get into the power of building groups, this session is definitely for you. So as we get into it, let's talk about our agenda, which basically is, what is this thing we call the intra-ID group text box? Why do we care about it? I'm going to show you a whole bunch of examples, right? Because the best way to kind of see this, understand it, is to see some examples, definitely not exhaustive. So lots and lots and lots of different examples that you could employ in your environment for your needs, whatever, right? Then I'll have an in action, which in this case will be an example scenario to solve. So let's jump right in. So what is the intra-ID group text box? There's a lot of different ways to think about this, right? I don't think that the term text box doesn't really roll off my tongue. I think of this basically as a query opportunity whenever we look at groups. And so let me show you what I'm talking about when I say text box. So let's go to groups and let's go create a new group, whatever, when we get there. New group, right? Has to be a dynamic group. So this text box approach doesn't really make sense for a static group or, sorry, let me do this. Talking and doing this at the same time. So add dynamic query, right? So we talked in the last session all about the options here and what we can do here, right? And we talked a little bit about this area, which is our text box area. Today's session will focus exclusively on this text box. And here are some examples you'll see here about rules that you can put into this text box. So whenever I refer to the text box, or I might call it a query box or whatever, you'll understand what I'm referring to. A couple of characteristics about this, right? What is this? It's a manual way for you to craft a rule. A query is the way I talk about it in my mind, the way exactly you want to, right? There are some scenarios where you need the flexibility to build an expression that you cannot build in the UI, right? And I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Also, dynamic. So this only really makes sense with dynamic groups. Being dynamic groups, they will reevaluate periodically. Be careful, we'll talk about at the end, that there are some efficiencies that you want to make sure that you adhere to or think about, right? As you're building these, it's possible to build a pretty complex expression that is unnecessarily complex, right? So we'll talk about some of that. And there it is an advanced approach, right? We talked in session 2, the previous session, about parameters, about operators, and that was to set the stage for this discussion for sure, but because parameters and operators are those items that you need to understand when you approach this, right? If you understand the parameters that are available to you from intra-ID, for example, and then you know which ones are available to you from Intune, right? Because this whole context of why we're talking about this is Intune, then it will be very easy, or much easier, for you to go in and build these groups with the advanced complexity that you want, right? So that's where we are. So why do we care about them? Well, because with this kind of approach, you have the ultimate in flexibility. right? You can build exactly what you want to build, sometimes more so than you can in the UI, right? So having that extra level of flexibility when you get into some unique scenarios, really important. There are some requirements that will take you here into the text box. You won't be able to do this in the UI in a few scenarios. So, for example, if you have a rule that needs to have more than 5 expressions, you can't do that in the UI. You need to do it in this text box. If you have, there's a type of rule called the direct reports rule. You'll actually see that coming up in an example. If you want to do something like that, right, then you can't do that in the UI. You have to do it in the text. If you have a rule where you need to use a contains operator, that is something you cannot craft from the UI. It's something you have to do in the text box, right? And the reason for that is it's really easy to use the contains operator, but the contains operator is one of those that is available to you, but is a bit more resource intensive on the back end. So we don't want it to be just a go-to kind of thing. And so we put it over in the text box. So it's a little bit more intentional to have to get there, right? The ability to set precedents of order of operations, right? Operator precedents. You'll see some examples of that coming up. And then if you have really complex expressions, again, kind of that you want to massage and make work the way that you want them to, this is a good place to do it. Okay, so now we're going to spend some time with a number of examples. So we'll start with one that's really, this one you could very easily craft in the UI, but we will talk about it here. And I'm not really going to go to the Intune portal for the rest of this because it's not really needed, right? And so hang with me. This is where I have the potential to lose you, right, as I go through some of these examples. But there are some good ones here that I want you to see. And these examples are not specifically going to make any impact on your environment. They might, right? But the goal here is not to be prescriptive as far as which ones you might want to use for your environment. It's to show you kind of what's available, how to use it, some options, get you thinking, right? Okay, so let's start here. User.department equals sales. Pretty easy, right? So return all users whose department is equal to sales, right? So let's keep going. So user department in. So here we have an array of numbers that could represent user departments. And so we want to return all users who have departments that are in this list. So in is one of those operators that can help you from an efficiency perspective. You'll hear me talk about that at the end of this whenever I talk about efficiency. Right? So this is a good example. Let's keep going. So employee hire date. So this is just, I like this one because it shows you, the greater than or equal operator. It also shows you system.now, which kind of tells you when you're thinking about crafting these expressions, you don't have to know the specific value necessarily that you want. You can have some variables in here. One of the variables is to use a system function like system.now as an example. There's also the plus operator. So in this case, it's plus 1 day, right? That you can use. And this is going to return users whose employee hire date was the date on the system now, plus possibly 1 day, which may not actually make sense in a real world scenario, but is not bad for an example. Another one, user employee hire date less than or equal to. In here, we're supplying the exact details of the date, right? In this format. Here's another one. All right, so this is starting to show where we can use regular expressions and the match operator. So here's a regular expression starting with DA. So this would match DA, would match DAV, would match David, right? All of that with this regular expression. Here's another one, right, where we're looking at the end with a bit of a wild card, VID. So David evaluates to true, DA evaluates to false. Right? So again, with the match operator. And again, just to remember, I'm not trying to show you things to say, use these in your environment. No, trying to show you things that will help you get thinking about things that you could do that are perhaps beyond the UI, or things that you don't think about in the UI or haven't thought about with groups, etc. Okay, another one. User.mail does not equal null. So what this one is showing is that we absolutely support the use of null in your expressions. So if you wanted to get all users that do have mailboxes, right, this expression would do that, because those users who do not have mailboxes would have nothing there, a null value. So we're trying to weed those out, right, as an example. Here's another one. Starting to get into some complex expressions. User department equals sales or marketing, right? So here, using the or operator, fine, right? There are some types where you don't want to just string ors together over and over and over. But, again, here's an example of using one. So we're going to pull back all users who are not sales department people or marketing department people into that group. All right, here's another one. The department equals sales, but the job title within sales is not SDE, right? We're starting with SDE as the job title, and we're using the not operator here. So another decent example there. Here's one where we're trying to pull the users in the marketing department that are based in the US, right? As a good one. And notice that we're not using parentheses in this expression, right? The parentheses are great for helping define how the system calculates the expression, so helping you define order of operations, etc. Here's another one. User country equals US, and the user's either in the marketing department or sales department, right? So the and with the complex expression. So this would be evaluated first inside the parenthesis, and then the rest of it would be evaluated after that, right? And we would get at the end the users we want that are based in the US and in either the marketing or the sales department. Here's one, right? User assigned plans, any of this expression, right? So any means anything that's within this expression. In this case, it's one item. It's a couple of items that are evaluated together. Plan ID and plan status, right, are enabled. So we have to have the user assigned plans be this plan ID and also enabled, right? Because here's this and. So any really would be any of the expressions within inside this parenthesis. In this case, this, because of the and, is evaluated together, right? Okay. Here's another use of any. So assigned plans are, the assigned plan service is SCO, and the capability is enabled. So here's another and. So this is with any, but the and kind of ties these two together. Let's keep going. Assigned plans. Anyone who has a plan ID that's not null, we will get back any user that has an assigned plan. We want all, of them. This one's interesting. So this is the first place that we've seen the underscore, right? So you might have used the underscore in various expressions, like in PowerShell or other places, and not really understood what that is, right? So the underscore is a way to pick out values that might exist within an array, right? So there are some values that are not single values. They might be an array of values. And if you want to query within that array, using the underscore tells the engine that, hey, you're about to get an array, and we want to sift within that array for any values. So if there's a value within that array that starts with Contoso, then as the proxy address, then we will return that for the user associated with that. If you look at our documentation, the exact way that we explain this is the underscore syntax matches occurrences of a specific value in one of the multi-valued string collection properties array to add user or devices to a dynamic group. It's used with the -any or the -all operator, right? Okay. Here's another one. And this is this is the one I referenced whenever I was talking about those items or those criteria that would force you to use a text box. So direct reports. This is a unique one that exists if we want to know who the direct reports are for a given manager, then we can find it using this kind of syntax. So the direct reports for, and then the object ID of the manager. So yeah, you can absolutely create groups, a static group, assign groups, whatever, and manually control the membership of that group for achieving the purpose of having a group of all the direct reports for a given manager. But how much easier is it to let that be a dynamic group and then just simply use the object ID of that manager, and then we'll just funnel together all of the direct reports. Whenever they change, they will be updated. It'll always be accurate and correct, right? So here's an example of using that. All right, what's next? And then let's see. For all groups. Now, all groups are interesting because if you go into your tenant, you may actually have all groups. Like for me, let's look in my tenant. If I want to look at my groups and I put in all, then I will see I have all devices, all users. There are some customers that I've worked with where they don't seem to have all devices and all users. I recall there was maybe a change made to some tenants where those all groups were actually removed. In Intune, it really doesn't make a huge difference because you can target all, even if you don't have the all group. So for example, let's go look at a, I don't know, configuration profile, perhaps. And then we'll look at one. Doesn't really matter which one I use. Look at the assignments, edit, and then you will see that I have all users, all devices. Even if I don't have the all users and all devices group in my tenant, this works okay, right? But if you want to add the all devices and all users to your tenant, basically these are ways you can do it. So user object ID isn't null, meaning it's an active user in your tenant. So this would be the equivalent or an expression that would give you all users. Right, here's one that would also give you all users where the object ID is not null and maybe the user type is a member, right? So that might be something to get a little bit more focused in. If you're really trying to recreate all users, I would use this one. Here's one for all devices, right? Device object ID is not null, meaning it's an active device or one that we have had active in the past, whatever, right? Okay, here's one. Right, extension attributes. So one of the criteria that we can use for creating groups is, and there's a number of them, right? One of them is extension attributes. So let's go back. I don't know, new group. Right, let's go dynamic and dynamic query. And from the drop-downs, we do have the ability from the drop-downs to pick extension attributes from extension attribute 1 to 15. So if you wanted to use one of those extension attributes, you could reference it very easily by whatever number it is, give it the equal statement, and we can use it. Of course, this does have the prerequisite to have some value populated into that extension attribute. In some cases, that might mean replicating it from on-prem AD, right? Lots of discussions within that. But if you do have something, as one of my customers does, where extension attributes are used and important to you, then we can use them in Intune as well. And not only can we use the defined extension attribute, there's the idea of the custom extension attribute. Now, the custom extension attribute is not something that you can use from the UI, right? But you can configure this custom extension attribute. You need, I'm not going to get into how you do that, but you need the GUID and you need the attribute name. Here's how you would reference it in your group membership, right? So this gives you a lot of possibilities. Remember I said that this is really important to understand, but it has the possibility of having you detach if this is not something you've thought about, right? Here's an example. This is extremely powerful to have the ability to add a custom extension attribute, right? And then leverage it for group creation. And here's how you would, once you create it, again, not getting into that, here's how you would reference it, right? Okay. And then here's an example with devices, right? So if you wanted to get all devices where the OS type was iPad, or it's iOS or it's iPhone, right? So device OS type, iPad, iOS, or iPhone, then this would pull all of those, right? Basically all of your iPhones, iPads, Apple managed or Apple devices in your environment. Here's another one. Any device that is Android, right? Very useful query to have. Here, if you want to dig in and have a device where the version is 10.0.1 or whatever, and it's a Windows device and it's managed by MDM, you can absolutely do that. All right. So that's it. You know, there's a lot of challenge or a lot of examples there of what you can do. Each environment will have your own needs for building groups and so on, but getting to the level of craftiness to be able to use the text box or the query or whatever, and understanding all the parameters and the operators, really important if you really want to take full advantage of groups. So to that end, here's a challenge, right, that can be solved with the text box as we just discussed, right? So the challenge is that you need to create a dynamic security group in Azure Active Directory, Entra ID Active Directory, based on employee ID, based on the employee ID field. So every employee has an employee ID in Active Directory, which is either 5 characters long or 4 characters long, and that depends on the type of employee that it is. For example, full-time employees always have a 5-digit number. Contract employees always have a 4-digit number, and the employee ID is always going to be a number. So you need a dynamic security group that is in Azure Active Directory that will take into account both situations, full-time employees or contract employees. And the key is all full-time employees, again, have to match a 5-digit number. Don't know what the numbers are, just has to be 5 digits. All contract employees have to match 4-digit. Again, don't know what they are, just know that they're digits and they have to match. So how would you craft that rule? So here's where you can pause the video and take a look at that, try to think through how you do it. So I will reveal the solution in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So here's the solution. Hopefully, you're able to think through this and come up with something similar to this, but to do this kind of rule, you would need a regular expression. So the employee ID has to match the regular expression, and it has to be with these characters either from 0 to 9, and it has to be a 4 or a 5-digit value, right? And then if it is, then we will include it within this group, all right? Okay, so enough fun. Let's get to the wrap up part of this and talking about efficiency, right? Well, mostly efficiency. So one thing, again, attributes. If you really want to be effective with groups and you really want to be able to do this kind of advanced detail with groups, then you need to know your attributes. You need to understand your parameters. That's why we did that in the previous session before we got here, right? When you're building your groups with the text box, then making sure that you design for efficiency, really important, right? So think about it. Maybe you would have a situation where you want to match, right, your regular expressions here. You might match ago, right, or match the wild card, where the front part we don't know, but the last part is ago. Yeah, those will work. You can do that. But what about if you just changed it and did a starts with, right? Lago, right? That if you know the first part of the name, then starts with would be a much more efficient operator, or even equals, where we can specifically hone in on that. Not shown here, but if there's a couple of different situations that you're trying to match, right, up here, then leveraging an in operator and providing a few of those options that you're trying to match against is more efficient, right? Contains is absolutely an operator that you need in certain situations, right? But it's an operator that does have a bit more of a heavy-handed load on the back end. And so if you need to use contains, then use it, but it's only available in the text box. So you're going to have to write your query, if you will, your rule, if you will, in the text box to get that done. All right, so think about this, the use of the or operator. So you could absolutely build an expression just like this, where all top 5 lines are strung together as one big expression, all separated by ors, right? So it's the user department is equal to accounts, and the city is one of these 5. Here's an example of using in, right? You still refer to the user department as accounts, but the city now is within this expression. This is a whole lot more efficient on the system than just stringing together a whole bunch of different or expressions, right? So that's one to think about when you're writing your rules for efficiency. Here's more for the or operator. So you could have the city not equals Lagos, and the city not equals Ibadan, and the city not equals Kaduna, or whatever altogether, versus using not in, right? Not in, a whole lot more efficient than the first expression. Both work, but we're looking for efficiency, right? Redundant criteria, things that you doesn't really need to be put together to achieve your goal, right? So user city equals Lagos, or user city starts with lag. Well, these are both the same. So you don't need both. One or the other would get you what you need. In this case, using starts with makes sense because you'll get Lagos and you'll get other things that might start with lag, or if you want to be more specific, just use the equals, right? So that's going to wrap up our session here. I knew it wouldn't take long. I didn't want it to take long because this is a discussion that can end up causing you to yawn. Hopefully that didn't happen, but it's I hope you agree, a very important topic to get your hands around, to understand as you're building groups. Yes, the focus here is Intune. This is not just focused on Intune. This is a groups discussion in general. So wherever you have the need to use groups, these same kind of thoughts apply. So from here, instead of being down at the 500-foot level viewing the details, we're going to come back up to the 10,000, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000, somewhere up there view. And the next topics we're going to kind of get our hands around are talking about nested groups. We're going to talk about how config manager collections can be turned into groups and some other things too. So probably another at least 2 to 3 sessions in the series and we'll be done. But we'll wrap this one up and we will see you next time.